Yeah. Yeah, turns out it was me, just me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have to change the last 3 times. Thank you.
Hello.
Presentation later on. Have you got something for me to load it up for you?
Yes, Raja, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Please. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mhm.
Sorry, I have like a question because you know, like you sent me that there was like an extranet from Rocher.
Mhm.
Now I cannot like the link that you gave me, it doesn't take us to anywhere. So
Okay, so the link for the extranet.
yes, so
So-
it's just take us to the normal homepage.
Yes, I will try to after my office to fix it. Okay.
Yes, thank you for the when
Welcome.
online people is asking or something.
Okay. Yes.
Thanks.
Should I sit anywhere?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kid pictures.
Yeah, exactly.
The final one.
She's been. Did I say anything?
Good morning.
With a
Yes.
USB port, is it possible do you think it will just work to plug it straight in?
Maybe the best way is to just for the presentation. You mean?
Yeah.
Maybe just I will upload to this folder. Maybe if you have a flash drive, because
Oh,
all the
yeah.
technicals.
Of course.
Yes.
Do you have a flash drive?
Yes.
Legend. Leave it with me.
Oh, okay. So you've got what
It's
you
all
need.
right.
Yes.
Ok, so c'est la même pour moi. Est-ce que possible de
Yes. Sure.
changer le...
No, we cannot. You cannot upload
no,
just by
yeah,
a flash drive.
Yeah,
Yes.
ok. Parfait.
Okay.
Ok.
So you know,
Okay.
If you need this,
Sure.
do you need this?
Est-ce qu'il y a une autre USB or... Parfait. Merci. Merci.
thank you.
Which one is it?
You need a KEMP.
Okay. This one.
Yes.
So I uploaded on workshop 4, okay?
Yes,
Perfect.
brilliant. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have to get your expertise in.
Yes, Wi-Fi prochaine small letter.
Seen those in the shop. They're really nice. Oh, yeah.
I've lost my list because this has got a camera in this house. And
Even looking at the states for federal system. But the way we work is in. You can't. But the thing you have to saying something either here, not in there, then you have.
Perfect.
So are you the IT pack man? that Has to make it all work.
Yes.
Good move.
Mhm. So which one is it?
It's
This one?
Geneva.
Geneva research presentation.
Yeah.
So I uploaded to workshop 4, okay?
Workshop 4.
Yeah, it's.
Is there lots in workshop 4?
Yes.
God,
So
show me.
yes, I will keep it open like this. And all the presentation are here. Here is there's this one.
Because I'm not an Apple man. I'm not an
Yes.
Apple person.
Yes,
New
you just need to
Click it.
click on it and after launch the diaporama.
All right, lovely. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Hello? Hello?
Un moment. Yeah, merci.
Oh, yeah.
I gave you the.
It's not accepting for some reason. No, so it's reading. She was trying to come down. Okay.
Sorry, I had to change my presentation with like small changes, so maybe delete that one.
This
That one, just delete it.
yes.
And I just send it to the correct one.
By email?
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
French is good better than mine. Les conférences, Catherine. Branche
Okay,
Catherine.
perfect. So I will upload it on
Oui.
workshop 4.
Okay, workshop 4.
This one,
Wait.
right? Workshop 4. So
Let's check.
The first one.
Oui.
Perfect.
Can you ouvert? Just
Yes,
merci. Ah, bravo. Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
Proposer à ceux qui sont nouveaux aujourd'hui de se présenter en 2 mots. Equipo collegio. Pensaba que hiciéramos que acaban de llegar de presentaciones palabras, ¿te parece?
Ok.
Entonces, ustedes,
¿Hace falta el
sí,
micrófono?
lo tienen que.
Right. Good morning, everybody. So today we speak with microphone because we have people on Zoom attending the event. Unfortunately, they were not able to come with us. So hello to some of our colleagues. Avril, I see you are connected. And I wanted to thank you for being back this morning. We locked the door yesterday, the gate, so we were sure with Mariana that nobody would escape. But it's a pleasure to welcome you for the, let's say, the more conference style discussion of our expert group. We have few more people today, and if you don't mind, I just wanted to give you perhaps the floor for the new arrival to say who you are and perhaps your organization. And then from that, we will proceed with the beginning of the day. And there will be other opportunity during the day to meet each other and present yourself. So I might keep the microphone in my hand and go around like if it was a TV program, because it's a little bit complicated with the methodology, technology. Sophie, you want to present yourself?
Yeah. Good morning, I'm Sophie Barbet. I'm Deputy Director of Fair Design in Lausanne. And it's a great pleasure to be here today with you, of course, and with all of you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Sophie. Ima?
Yes, hello. So my name is Ima Guerras. I am the coordinator of the Child and Youth Rights Unit at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I'm also very happy to be here with you today.
Ina?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ina Verzivoli. I'm a child protection specialist with UNICEF, working on justice for children and violence against children. So very happy to be here.
Quite intimidating, no? To have me so close when you speak.
Good morning. Hi to everyone. I'm Florence Luffer. I'm the director of Prison Insider. We're an information platform on prison conditions throughout the world. So citizen journalism, but with the angle of human rights, and obviously youth are a big issue in that dimension.
Thank you, everybody. And we have our colleague as well from WHO, but you will have the floor in 2 minutes, so I give you at that time. So we just wanted to brief you a little bit about the program of today. and perhaps give you some information about why we are here today. And then I will give you the floor, So with my colleague Mariana, we wanted to tell you a little bit about the Global Initiative on Justice with Children, which is at the origin of this event. So, ¿dónde está? Usamos esto, ¿no? Sí. Right. So in 2019, Tervezom created the Global Initiative on Justice with Children, which is an international movement in favor of fair justice for all children, and which objective is to keep the momentum on child justice all over the world. And you see, in the technology and me is not this way. Mariana, help. Excellent.
It's working.
Perfect. Yes, it's working. So, as I say, the Foundation Tervezom, and yesterday for the group who were there, I present you Tervezom more in details. The organization was created in the 60s, and it's a humanitarian organization, the Swiss leader in humanitarian action for children. And through the Access to Justice program with partners, we decided to create this global initiative, which now has been at the origin of several momentum on child justice. So the first one was in 2009, what we call the World Congress on Justice with Children. So you can see the first one was in Peru in 2009, focusing on restorative justice. And then from these activities, what we aimed to do was to promote in the international agenda the concept of restorative justice. So we influence, of course, different international mechanisms, and by bringing information, practices, etc. ECOSOC resolution from 2008 was organized around the World Congress as well. And in 2015, we came back to Geneva with the World Congress on Child Justice, about prevention and reintegration, and the objectives was to focus mainly on new tendencies regarding and trends regarding child justice. And 2018, where actually we had for the first time, and that was I was explaining to most of you yesterday, we have for the first time these first steps on neuroscience and children's rights with the participation of you. Mariana?
Yes, so yeah, I'm Mariana Perez. I also work with Cedric in the Global Initiative. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Welcome. And yes, so I continue with the last World Congress that was take part in 2021. It was planned to be in Mexico, but well, we all know what happened, and then it had to be online, but it was really successful online, because for the first time we get to host the World Congress in 5 continents of the world, with more than 4,800 intergenerational participants from over 150 countries. So we have sessions in regional sessions from all regions of the world, and also like workshops per like approximately 14 to 16 workshops per region in different topics on child justice, in access to justice for children, and non-discrimination of children in the justice systems. So the global from this World Congress, the outcome was the Global Initiative on Justice with Children, with what the topic was to ensure access to justice for children towards non-discriminatory and inclusive child justice systems. So for this global declaration, we work with experts, with professionals, but also with children to draft this global declaration, which is that highlights specific action points to be taken by states, by civil society, in partnership with children as well. which can take these actions to holistically encompass to build the building of frameworks, of procedures and services that are designed to address the needs of individual and marginalized children. So the Global Declaration placed children and young people at the center of the justice systems. So the signatories were Terre des Hommes, Penal Reform International, the International Association of Judges and Magistrates, the International Institute of Children's Rights, the host of the World Congress, and which was the Supreme Court of Mexico. UNICEF also endorsed this document, as well as the UNODC, the OHCHR, and also Violence Against Children, the Secretary General, Pathfinders, and of course, our really good friend, Baker McKenzie. So it was quite successful, and until now, we've translated this document in more than 30 languages. Will be just available online.
So we had around 5,000 participants in Mexico online, and this is why we decided to have small group now. 5,000 is too much, not anymore. But the good things, you know, those World Congresses, if we explain you about that, is because what we try to create is like an international brain on child justice. What is happening, to have a snapshot of the situation, what is happening, we all convene together. It's 1 week, we can manage few days brainstorming around child justice, and above all, trying to figure out what will be the next challenges. So as a consequence of the last World Congress and the Global Declaration, we identified with a group of experts, the scientific committee, etc., like 5 big topics that the Global Initiative, Terre des Hommes, and our partners are working on. And then we wanted to share a little bit with you about those areas, because I think that all interconnected and they are important to even for the workshop today. So the first one, we started to work on digital justice and children's rights, particularly through 2 areas. The first one is virtual court, the use of virtual court during COVID. We knew that during COVID, it was something that we saw was positive to keep the justice system going, etc. But now that we come back to the normal, what are the procedural safeguards for children in this kind of new ways to give justice? First thing, virtual court. Second thing, which is very important, is about predictive justice. And unfortunately, I will say directly, you will see where I'm going, it's getting everywhere. Predictive justice in police, predictive justice or the use of artificial intelligence in justice, in the role of the lawyer, etc., etc. So there is really a lot of work to do on that. Justice in time of crisis, which main focus on climate change, and above all, climate justice. So how climate affect the administration of justice by itself. When there is a heat wave, we saw that the cases in several states where through the heat waves, inmates die, cooked in a way, and flooding as well, etc. How climate change affect urban areas, urban change, and what are the consequences on crime prevention as well. So that all of that is very interesting to try to see what will happen next. Community empowerment, this is something that we believe a lot in Terre des Hommes, is going through restorative justice, the role of the police, child-friendly police, community leaders as well, legal pluralism, deprivation of liberty, ending child detention. This is something that we are working on as a follow-up as well of the global study on children deprived of liberty. I should not forget that. And why we are here today, the neuroscience and child justice, and I say it's starting in 2018 with you, but what we try to bring here is to have a new language for child justice professional, new information that for most of you, this is your daily life. But when you will work with professional, there is a lot of situation where neurodisabilities is not known at all. The consequences of traumatic brain injuries on the child behavior, their recognition in sentencing, etc., is not well developed yet, and that's why we are here today. So just to give you where we're going, let's say. So we are aiming to continue organizing those activities until the new development of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. But I will stop here. We will have a lot of opportunities to speak. I wanted you to ask to say a few words if you want, and don't forget to press this button. It's quite painful.
Pressing the painful
Says
button.
so.
Yes.
So it's a wonderful thing to be here, to have so many people interested in child justice and interested in how we can try to bring our systems and services together in a better way to try to serve the needs of young people and children. And Cedric and I have been trying to plan and develop this area for a while. I'm very pleased that you involved me in planning this back from 2018. You started going, oh, that's an interesting area. Well, develop things and bring things together. So the work we've been doing links to the UN study on children deprived of liberty, in which identified at the very least 8 million children deprived of liberty worldwide. And in that report, there's a section on the mental health and neurodisabilities that are very prevalent in the population. And the issue is that those problems are associated with behaviors that get criminalized and also made worse and amplified over time, and deny children and young people opportunities to be in society and to be safe in society as well. So there's some important elements that we're hoping to get across today is how we can try to build better whole justice systems approaches, so we can try to, at the earliest possible times, try to reduce the chances of children being caught up in the justice system and be able to be in safer societies more effectively, I guess. So thank you very much, Cedric, for the opportunity to bring people together, and Mariana for helping organize and putting this together as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, But we wanted to ask you, Chika, perhaps to say a few words. So we have the opportunity to have Chika Saxena from the World Health Organization with us. And this afternoon we will have more UN bodies as well. So I think I see that as an opportunity to see what we can do all together to bring to the agenda the concept of how can we tackle neurodisabilities and their recognition in child justice. But good luck with the button. So you just press all the time. Yes.
Thank you, Cedric. And the first thing I want to clarify is that I am no more working for WHO. So my introduction was quite wrong. I used to work and work for 20 years time for WHO, but I did leave it in 2018. And currently I teach at Harvard School of Public Health in Boston. I divide my time between Geneva and Boston. And actually yesterday only I came back from Boston. So it was very timely that I could join you here, maybe for a short time, but still, it's a very important topic. My expertise in this area is zero. So I will talk about some of the aspects which find me relevant. I'm a mental health person. I'm a psychiatrist by training. I'm also a public health person. I've spent 20 years in WHO and further on public health issues. I want to introduce a few things which might be either directly or indirectly related to the discussions that you will have. The first is a bidirectional interaction between neurological and mental health problems and children being in the justice system. One leads to another. So children who have either a neurological issue to begin with, like birth trauma, like intellectual disability, like autism spectrum disorder, are likely to have behavior which could be either criminal or seem to be criminal. And that leads them to the criminal justice system. But it's the other way around also is true, because children who end up in criminal justice system lead a life which is full of trauma to the brain and to their mental health. So one perpetuates the other one. And in many cases, it's a vicious cycle, which leads these children as they grow into people who have lots of neurological and mental health issues, and actually their development suffers. So there is a perpetual decrease in the mental health and well-being as they face. Actually, WHO does define health as an aggregation of physical, mental, and social well-being. Many people don't realize that social well-being is part of that. And these children have less physical well-being, less mental well-being, but very much less social well-being, because they're excluded from the normal development process that makes them more social and in a positive way. And sometimes people use the word antisocial or asocial, but actually the criminal justice system perpetuates that. And that is a kind of vicious cycle which happens. The second point I wanted to mention is this concept of mental health and neurodiversity as a spectrum and not as a binary. When I was working for WHO, I helped to develop the International Classification of Diseases 11th version, which is the current version, which takes a binary approach, which has its value. When you go to a doctor, you need a diagnosis. And that diagnosis decides what kind of treatment you're likely to have and who will reimburse for that, whether the state or a private insurance and so on. So it has its value. It has its value in more than one ways, because when you get a diagnosis, the whole research area which has been on that diagnosis can be applied to you. So a drug which has been developed specifically for that diagnosis, the doctor decides whether the drug is useful to you or not. And that kind of conceptual process takes place with a diagnosis. But increasingly in the last 10 years, we are realizing that especially in the area of neurological development as well as mental health, diagnoses actually are not very helpful, apart from clinical practice. So we have advanced, and we have written about it, the concept of mental health as a spectrum, as a continuum, where all of us are at somewhere on that. Mental health, the word has been corrupted. It applies now, as people understand, to mental disorders. Actually, we need to go back to the concept of mental health, which applies equally to me and you and everybody else. Mental health is not about those 5% people who might have a diagnosable illness at this point of time. And the percentage increases to 25% if you take a life course approach. So all of us have a possibility to have a mental disorder diagnosable throughout our life, 1 in 4, which is very large. But we all have mental health, and we are on that continuum somewhere. We might have positive mental health today. We might have mental health symptoms tomorrow, and we might have a disorder day after. And children are specifically very much on the continuum and dimensional approach than even us, because they're developing. And there is a third dimension, which is the dimension of development. And WHO has published, along with UNICEF, the Nurturing Care Framework, which actually talks about these kind of aspects which children develop in their physical, mental, social, and emotional fields. And somewhere on that, on each of the dimensions, they might be doing very well, they might not be doing very well, and some of them will have delays and disorders. So we're talking about the whole spectrum and not only disorders alone. Even considering the disorder themselves, and I'm sure in one of the subsequent sessions you will have some data on that, the percentage of children who have a disorder is actually quite high. and the percentage of children in the justice system who have a disorder is actually much higher. So we're talking about a substantial number of children and adolescents who will have a mental health or a neurological issue. And as I said earlier, it becomes a vicious cycle. Third point about research, and I'm sure you will hear a lot about research. Many of you are very accomplished researchers in the area of neurological development and cognitive development. Some of the methods that have been used for research are so sophisticated that for an average child in an average judicial system will never have access to that. So yes, we do need research. We need to know more, but my view is from a public health aspect, we need to use the knowledge that we already have much more in those circumstances where this knowledge can actually directly lead to action. And that's what makes me believe that training to any professional, either in the legal field or in the health field or in the disability field, on neurological and mental health assessment of children is extremely useful. And much of that assessment will be by a good history taking, by observing the child and not by investigations. So yes, we need to know about investigations, but we need to apply the knowledge that can actually be useful to train people in a very short time for them to be able to do the job that they are asked to do. And so more awareness, more training to really ground level people will be extremely useful. And again, fortunately, WHO and UNICEF have developed a number of instruments that could be useful. Just to name a couple of them, WHO developed what is called the MHGAP Intervention Guide, which is for adults as well as children. And for children, there is a section on epilepsy, which incidentally is a very large proportion of neurological illnesses amongst children. Almost 3% children in general population can have epilepsy, and in judicial system, the percentage is much higher. So quick diagnosis of epilepsy and care, quick diagnosis of a behavioral disorder of childhood, and what can be done are essential for people who deal with children anywhere, and which can be school, which can be judicial system, or it can be healthcare or social protection system. So I would very much advocate for us to use simple methods which can be used anywhere rather than to use very sophisticated methods, which are very useful, but not for everybody. The fourth point I wanted to make is on the rights, which I know very little about, but at least I'm aware that there is the convention, UN Convention on the Rights of Child, but also CRPD, which is the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, which children are again included in that. And in an average low and middle income country, the awareness about these rights and their application is extremely limited. Countries have gone ahead and signed these conventions, but they've not created the infrastructure to actually implement these rights. And these rights are extremely important in justice system, because those rights are every day abused, especially for children. So we again need more awareness and more implementation of these rights for every child, but also especially for those children who might have a disability. Finally, my last point is on what happens when a child is in an abnormal situation. Obviously, all of us agree that the best place for the child to grow is the family. However, many children do not have a family or end up in a situation where they are not with the family, and judicial system is one of the prominent ones in there. That situation itself is abnormal, and that situation itself decreases the chances that child will develop normally. SDGs say that we all have rights, and health is one of those rights, and mental health is included within that. So these children are being denied, just by being placed in the justice system, the right to develop their mental health in the best possible way. So it's not only that their rights are being abused because of something else, being just there and not in a normal family environment where their development can grow well is itself a problem. And that is something that we again need to pay a lot of attention to. We do know the social and economic determinants of health, including of mental health, are very prominent. So we don't have to look inside the brain. The brain may be quite normal, but it's the circumstances which are a problem. And in many cases, the judicial system actually is a threat to the child. And that is something that we all need to recognize and hopefully take care of it. Research has very clearly demonstrated that early childhood experiences, especially those which are adverse, can have a very lasting impact on our mental health. The incidence of depression, incidence of drug abuse, the incidence of alcohol problems, as well as incidence of psychosis even, increases if the child has had adverse circumstances within the early developmental phase. And that is something which we all need to try to avoid. And justice system is one of the prominent places where this action can take place. We all have our own perspective. I'm sure it's a very diverse group, but these were some of the things that I wanted to mention. I'll be able to stay for a short while, but I will learn more, and I wish you all the success in the workshop. Thank you.
You? Yeah.
I see which one is the speaker. Which one is the speaker? All?
Late, but not yet. See. No, not me, but yeah, Judy, yes.
Yes, all the people there, you can speak now.
Okay. But
Great.
what, where to sing this in their Zoom? Where to sing this?
Do you want
cannot
to?
see, we want to see like at least a room.
The room?
Yes.
Mhm.
Sorry, just some technical inconvenience.
Hello, is this working? Yes, it is. Right. Until we've settled the technical issue, which is being settled behind me, I just wanted to say, Dr. Satine, that was really wonderfully put. Thank you very much for doing that. Absolutely right. So there's such a need to try to create ways in which we can translate understanding and formulations of mental health, neuro disabilities, and so on into actionable means within different contexts. I mean, it may be that there's less resource or whatever, but across the board, there's a need to try to create ways in which workers who are frontline workers are able to be able to take into account the issues of young people with neurodisabilities, and neurodisabilities are incredibly common within the population that we're talking about, as you indicated. With neurodisabilities may well reflect injuries to brain systems, may well reflect adverse childhood experiences and all the rest of it. We're not going to go into the details of all the various mechanisms by which these occur. We'll talk a bit about traumatic brain injury, for example. So one big point that we'd like to bring out in terms of recommendations from the next couple of days is how do we best try to work to bring through ways of working to better support children. So the issues identified earlier, better to provide the right kind of support to reduce the chances of criminalization of behaviors. And to provide better access to socialization. One of the key things in neuroscience is the understanding that play is incredibly important. Curiosity is incredibly important for development. Play is incredibly important, and how can you have play in the context of criminal justice? Very difficult. You're under threat all the time, and your brain has been conditioned to be fearful and all the rest of it. So that's an area that we might have a bit of a chat about, well, how can you create safe, secure environments in which people can thrive, children can thrive, particularly when family systems have fractured in various ways. So what is a system response to that? And I was pleased to hear that there are various ways in which that we can try to bring evidence through, so that we can say that interventions can be evidence-led. So we know that these things are factors within the young people that we want to work with. Therefore, we should be actioning things in a way that's practical and straightforward. Oh, right. I will shush. And so the PowerPoint. Oh, the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Which one is it?
Oh,
This one?
this one, yeah. Is that one, isn't it? Let's be bigger here.
This is the palm, yes.
Okay. Right, so I'm going to now turn over to my colleague, Hope. Hope Kent is a PhD candidate with us at the University of Exeter in the UK. So over to you, Hope.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you all for being here as well and bringing all of your expertise across so many different areas. Some fascinating points brought up already, so thank you. I'm going to talk to you a bit about neurodisability amongst children in the criminal justice system. And what I want to do this morning, we're going to be getting into some quite complex discussions later. So I want to just set some sort of perhaps shared understanding of what we mean when we talk about neurodisability, and make sure that we're all starting with the shared understanding of what the problem is and how big the problem is. So the first thing I'm going to do is just offer a bit of a definition of neurodisability. This is defined in different ways sort of across the world, so people might want to expand on this definition as we enter discussions later. But I would define neurodisability as an umbrella term for a collection of congenital and acquired neurodevelopmental conditions. So that means congenital being present since birth and acquired during or after birth. And these conditions broadly impact the brain and the nervous system. And a really complicated mix of factors can lead to neurodisability, and neurodisability frequently manifests in childhood during really key developmental stages. So although it's really varied in presentation, these disabilities are characterized by a combination of functional difficulties, which sort of accompany occasionally physical disability as well. But I'm going to talk about the functional disabilities because they're often hidden and under-recognized in the criminal justice system. So those sort of areas of functional difficulties are often executive function, so complex thought and action, including planning and sequencing tasks, controlling impulsive behavior and responding to change, as well as cognition, so learning, memory, attention and concentration, and reasoning, communication, including speech, expressive language and receptive language, and emotional function, so regulating and expressing emotion, which includes responding to the emotions of other people as well. So these conditions may vary over time, may occur alone or in combination. There's really high levels of comorbidity between these conditions, and include a really broad range of severity and complexity. So some examples of what sort of conditions this might include: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, autism spectrum conditions, acquired brain injuries, including traumatic brain injuries, which I know Hugh's going to talk a bit more about, epilepsy, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, developmental coordination disorder, developmental language disorder, dyslexia, but that list does go on as well. And so what I want to really be clear is that we're grouping these conditions together because they're often under-recognized and often impact the same functional domains. So we can sort of think about them collectively. So how big is the problem? So I really like this table. It's taken from this report, which is called Nobody Made the Connection. And it's a report from 2012. So these statistics are a little bit old, but I think the table really summarizes exactly how big this problem is that we're working with. So as you can see, the middle column there is the reported prevalence rates amongst young people in the general population. And that's then compared to reported prevalence rates amongst young people in custody. So you can see that there's a pattern all the way down that table where reported prevalence rates in the general population are far lower than reported prevalence rates amongst young people in custody. it's really important to point out that these are known rates. So as with anything in this field, that's often an underrepresentation because children might go unrecognized or unscreened. But you can see just some like striking examples: learning disabilities, that top row there, 2 to 4% in young people in the general population, 23 to 32% amongst young people in custody. Communication disorders as well, I think, is the other really striking one, 5 to 7% amongst young people in the general population, and 60 to 90% of young people in custody have a communication disorder. And you can start to see how when children can have comorbid conditions, so can have more than one of these conditions, the picture is really quite striking of how overrepresented these children are in our criminal justice system. So when we start to think about what causes this overrepresentation, I'd like to suggest the social model of disability as a framework for starting to understand this and starting to understand the problem. The social model of disability was developed by Professor Mike Oliver, who published about it in 1983, and I'd really recommend his work. It's really interesting. But essentially, individual or medical models of disability locate the problem of disability within the person. So the difficulties arise from a physical or psychological deficit within that person. So for example, a child with ADHD might have a disability because they're unable to concentrate and unable to pay attention, for example, in a classroom. Whereas social models of disability locate the problem within society, so a failure to create accessible and appropriate services which fully take into account the needs of the disabled person, or in this case, a child with neurodisability. So for example, ADHD might only be debilitating for that child because they're expected to concentrate in a classroom for an hour without a break. So we locate the problem of the disability within society rather than within the child. So as Mike Oliver puts it, the consequences of this failure doesn't simply and randomly fall on individuals, but it falls systemically upon disabled people as a group who experience the failure through discrimination institutionalized throughout society. So I'm going to talk a bit more about what that actually means in this context as well. So it means that discrimination arises through inaccessible health, education, and social care systems, and also through combined disadvantage as well. So we know from our research that neurodisability in combination with living in poverty or with childhood adversity leads to far worse outcomes than neurodisability for children who are middle or high socioeconomic status, or children who aren't living with childhood adversity as well. So that combined disadvantage is really, really important. So an example from education in the UK, in a mainstream school, a child with a neurodisability might experience a lack of identification and appropriate support. Perhaps they need more help with their work or one-to-one support. They don't get that, aren't identified for that. This can then lead to school exclusion as their behaviours in the classroom don't suit the norm of what we expect behaviours in the classroom to look like. That might be a few fixed term exclusions, which I think are called suspensions in other countries. And there might be a permanent exclusion or expulsion. And that also not only excludes them from mainstream education, but also mainstream peer groups as well. And we know that children with special educational needs, which would include neurodisability in the UK, make up 14% of the school population, but 47% of school exclusions. And we suspect that those who are excluded who don't have a recognised special educational need are also probably under-identified as well. So they might have something like a brain injury, which hasn't been picked up on. They then would go to most likely a pupil referral unit, which is a kind of alternative provision, which tends to be a bit of a melting pot of really, really vulnerable children who are all put in a classroom together. There's lots of sort of routes then for like gang exploitation, county lines, things like that. And the internalisation of that message of being a bad kid, not fitting in, having to go to a behavioural school. And we know that 77% of children in pupil referral units in the UK have a special educational need that's been identified. So you can really see this sort of funneling out of mainstream towards alternative provision and then eventually towards the criminal justice system, as well as children in pupil referral units are really overrepresented in the criminal justice system as well. Lots of people who are adults in the criminal justice system have been to pupil referral units as children. So not only can we think of the criminalization of children with neurodisability in a social model, but we can also think of recriminalization as well. So any children might struggle to understand their rights in police custody or struggle to engage with really complex court processes. They're really difficult systems to navigate for anybody, but children with neurodisability are going to find that harder tenfold than children without. And they might, for example, struggle to regulate their emotions in custody, which could lead to harsher sanctions, longer probation sentences. So there's lots of ways that neurodisability within the criminal justice system leads to recriminalisation. They might also struggle to remember probation appointments or complex parole conditions as well. So sort of some things that we can think about in the roundtable discussion that we'll get to as well. We face lots of challenges to ensuring that children with neurodisability have their rights met in the criminal justice system. That includes raising awareness, doing screening, training and understanding, and then having resources and interventions to be able to divert children into. And then also siloed working, so where children might have their needs identified in one area, and then they move to a different system or a different service, and that information isn't passed across to different systems. So just a few thoughts on screening. I really echo what you said earlier about thinking about why we're using screening tools and how they can be useful on the ground for people who are doing this work on the front line. And diagnostic screening tools do present difficulties. How many conditions should we expect a prison officer to screen for or to know about? Is it helpful for a prison officer to know that somebody's got fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or is it more helpful for them to know that they have issues with memory and might need help with remembering appointments? The button. Okay. So there's also issues where somebody might score 14 and be below the diagnostic threshold, and somebody else might score 15 and be above the diagnostic threshold, but need the same level of support. It's just there are arbitrary cutoffs that dictate what a diagnostic threshold is. So in our work in the UK, we found that screening in prisons transdiagnostically for functional domains like memory that the person might need support with could be more useful to prison staff than screening for diagnostic conditions. So an example of how we do that, if anybody's interested, is Do It Profiler. They have a computerized screening tool. It's organized into modules. It has built-in accessibility features, and it collects both data about the individual's life, so education, whether or not they were in care, what their home situation is, as well as functional screening assessments that tell prison officers if they've got problems with memory or with executive function and planning, and what the prison officers can do about that to support that person. So yeah, it's a good resource if you're interested in screening. So just my concluding thoughts and points for discussion is that children with neurodisability are systemically criminalised, and this starts upstream in education, health and social care. And the social model of disability can help us to understand this. And we should consider why we're screening in different contexts and design our tools accordingly. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Hugh, now.
Thank you. Okay. And just say Hope is working, Hope and I are working together, as my PhD candidate, on a project involving the Ministry of Justice and the Department of Education on a data set that's about 500,000 kids, I think, isn't it? Something like that, Hope. So we're trying to identify what are some of the factors way back in people's lives that predict that they ended up in the criminal justice system. One of the big problems in administrative data sets is that nobody screened, nobody knew that somebody had ADHD or autism spectrum or language problems and what have you. And the head notes were then speech and language kind of section of the group today. The language and communication problems reflects underlying neural disabilities one way or another. So and it's your key issue in the criminal justice system, because how somebody's supposed to understand what's going on? How can they self-regulate? We all tell ourselves how to run our lives, right? You go in the speech. How is somebody with a neurodisability with a language communication problem supposed to be going, oh, okay, well, I need to do this, do next, and the next thing to plan and organize myself. This morning, did you plan and organize yourself out loud? Oh God, I've got to do a talk today, or I need to go to this meeting. I wonder what it's about, la, la, la. Yeah. your inner speech is important, and kids with neurodisability haven't got that inner speech in the same way. They haven't been able to internalize how to regulate behavior and so on. Just being very mindful that we're in the territory of Jean Piaget. And also there's people here who know about Vygotsky and so how children learn to self-regulate and develop their ways of thinking about the world and manage their own emotions and so on is very important. Now, why I'm mentioning that is that I'm going to, over the next day, or today and into tomorrow, we're going to be thinking about young people who come through the criminal justice system. One of my colleagues over here, James, and others are going to talk about people young people that they work with and what the issues are and what the presentations are like. And as we've been reminded, there's often comorbidities. You may have ADHD and with a brain injury, and may come across as autism spectrum because there's a lack of theory of mind or emotional empathy or so on. Or it may appear to be, but it might not be the case, right? So there's a complexity and comorbidity. So, right, so I'm going to switch a little bit now. Any questions, by the way? Any questions? No? All right. Oh, go on.
One, not because I'm looking for an answer now, but looking to open. Thank you very much. I fully agree, but then how we also avoid labeling, right? Because
Oh, yeah.
we also know that this could happen.
Yeah.
Not for now, but it was that on my head, so at some point.
Thank you. Thank you. How to avoid labeling, not to label in order to limit was Alfred Binet's phrase, wasn't it? Because Binet was asked to come up with a way of trying to find a way to identify the kids in French schools who could benefit from extra support. And that's where we get IQ tests from. And so it's been perverted, hasn't it? The IQ tests have been used to kind of, oh no, you can't be allowed services because your IQ is not like this. So not to label in order to limit, but to identify, enable, to support. That's the key thing. And thank you for that question, is to identify how we can support. So thank you. Any other questions or thoughts or comments? Okay, right. In that case, then I shall carry on. If you've got any questions, please ask as we go along. Okay. Thank you. And I know we've got lots of different languages in the room as well, and I'm so sorry that I am hopeless about in the one of the most beautiful languages there is, which is French. I'm so sorry. I apologize. And there are many other beautiful languages too, I'm sure, in the room. So I'm terribly sorry. No parler français, etc. So sorry again. Feel so embarrassed. But if you do have questions and comments, because language does shape us and all the rest of it. Anyway, I'll carry on. So traumatic brain injury, the painful button. If I stop pressing the button, yeah. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you very much. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, which means I trained as a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and then I specialized in neuropsychology, which is an understanding of brain and behavior, and why people, after they've had a brain injury, may have particular problems in terms of being able to remember, being able to organize themselves, be able to pay attention to things, be able to speak eloquently or not, and so on and so forth. So neuropsychology is an area where, as I said yesterday, people were listening to that. It's a very practical end of psychology, because it's about kind of, well, what's going on in the brain? Why can't someone do that? And can we find a way to help them be able to do that thing that they now can't do? And traumatic brain injury is one of the biggest causes of death and disability in the world. It is actually the biggest cause of death and disability in children and young people, or anybody up to the age 40, traumatic brain injury, in road accidents, falls, fights, and so on and so forth. Biggest. It's known as the invisible disability because it so often goes unrecognized. So that's one of the big problems that we have. Traumatic brain injury is under-recognized, and therefore its consequences are not addressed, typically speaking. And one of the big problems is that our traditional systems and services for medical conditions, and from Hope the social model, which is vital, our usual treatment choices are not particularly available because people haven't paid attention to developing services, unless you're lucky enough to be in Paris and you have Mathilde, who is a brilliant service in Paris. But brain injury services are very lacking globally to help people to recover after a brain injury. And I'm now realizing that I haven't even gone beyond my first slide, so I need to move on in a moment. But I'm trying to give you an introduction to why I'm doing the work that I'm doing in this area and where I'm coming from. So, okay, so I trained as a neuropsychologist. I worked in neuropsychological rehabilitation. So that is enabling people after car accidents, assaults, they now may have an injury to the frontal part of the brain. This is a quick check in the room or online. What's the frontal part of the brain do? If you have an injury to this side of the brain over here, James, what does this part of the brain do? Executive functions, very good. What does that mean?
The difference between what you should do versus what your peers should do, it means long-term thinking versus present thinking.
Very good, excellent. So there's executive functions, long-range decision-making, and I'm pointing at the left prefrontal system as well, aren't I? Which allows you to think ahead. The dorsolateral system allows you to think ahead. What about the right side? The right prefrontal system, the right hemisphere, what does that do, especially the front? What does that tell you? What does that enable you to do? This allows you to plan ahead. Fight or flight, very good. And anybody else enjoy it? So what does this system over here help you to then navigate, doesn't it? So fight or flight helps you navigate quickly. Should I be frightened? Should I be moving away? Should I be going towards? Yeah. So your frontal brain systems are really important for decision making and thinking things through, weighing up the consequences of action and thinking, is this the right thing to be doing? Etc. etc. So your frontal lobes are incredibly important. Right. So what about this area of the brain to the side over here and over here? Temporal lobes, temp. Any thoughts? Temporal? Memory. Thank you, Laurie. Okay, so memory. So left hemisphere, memory for things you've heard. Right hemisphere, things you've seen effectively. And on it goes in parietal areas, visuospatial systems for understanding. I'm standing over here, there's a boat over there at 2 o'clock. So I'm visualizing that boat and I'm now visualizing being on that boat and sailing it across the lake. That's my parietal area helping me to navigate my way. That's my escape route, by the way. It's not my boat, but anyway. So the brain is incredibly important for navigating your way through life, and it evolves over time and all that. So traumatic brain injuries happen, but in all over the world, huge levels of traumatic brain injury, but they often happen in children and young people, and they're happening in children and people whose brains are not fully developed yet. So that's a key issue. So we don't know what they would have been like because their development has been affected. So this is, and thank you for the point about the frontal lobes. So on the top left over there, you've got a graphic showing phases of particular growth in brain systems, especially frontal lobes, but overall brain volume changes over time. You can see at age 2, there's a big spurt of brain development, a big spurt, and that comes along with language kicking in. And then at around 7, 8, 9, another spurt in development, another spurt around 13, another spurt around 14, 15. We'll be hearing from James later about the social, emotional changes that come along in adolescence. So your brain, 100 billion neurons are connecting up through childhood, connecting up. Each neuron has up to 30,000 connections. So it's massively connected and complex. And the graphic underneath that is a graphic. If you find the overhead and click through into the graphic, you'll see changes in brain systems over time. The first part of the brain to really mature and become adult-like in its function is the mesolimbic system or mesolimbic system or messy limbic system, as I call it. Messy. It's messy because that's the system for reward, pleasure. So think back to adolescence. What happens when you're 13 or 14? What's kicked in, right? Pleasure, seeking pleasure, etc. Procreation as recreation is one phrase I can use. And, okay, good. You're on the same page? Right, good. But what's not yet developed is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the systems of being able to navigate life and decide, is that a good idea or not a good idea? Is it a good idea to do that or not? Dad's gone off to South Africa for a week to do research, etc. Oh, so my son at 16 decides to have a party in the house. Of course he does, because he thinks he'll get away with it. No, he won't, because his sister adopts him in. But only after he's paid her to clean the house. Because she's got another agenda, hasn't she? Anyway, so decision-making in adolescence is affected because of this disconnect in the adolescent brain to do with risk-taking. So there's the brain system going, it's not just about pleasure, it's also about fear and one's sense of safety in the world. We can come back to that as well. So the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, not mature until 19 or 20 or into your 20s, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, weighing up decisions. And yesterday sorry, I need to change my hand, weighing up whether it's a good idea or not to do something. So yesterday we were hearing about the age of criminal responsibility in various contexts. So it's way into the teenage years, into the late teenage years, that the brain's capable of thinking about, especially under peer pressure. Under peer pressure. So a child, a young person might say, oh yeah, sure, I'll get the last bus home, let's say 11 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh, Mr. Person, terribly sorry, because, etc., etc. I'm using those examples because they come to my mind very quickly. But you can imagine, right, the decision-making of a young person is affected by the people that are around on a regular basis. So the brain's going through its changes, there's a disconnect. And so into this mix of immaturity in terms of brain systems, unfortunately, very commonly, there can be traumatic brain injuries. And this is a study we did in Devon in southwest England in the emergency department, showing that there's a peak in traumatic brain injuries between 14 and 21 during a developmental period. So risk-taking behavior, falls, fights, sports accidents, and so on happening between 14 and 21. The highest peak is for urban boys, the next peak is for rural boys, and then comes down to the girls. But if you track back, you can see that girls and boys under 5 at age around 3 are also massively at risk of having brain injuries. These are kids coming through our emergency department, and these are moderate to severe brain injury. I'll say more about moderate to severe brain injury in a minute. But if you'd notice that, so around 3 years of age, so what's happening when you're 3? You're exploring the world, and you're going towards things, and you fall off things, you're toddling. So therefore you end up falling. Who's more precarious in that situation? Well, it's going to be the children of people or families who are most deprived. We found that children from the poorest 5% of our society, for the children who are under 5 from the poorest 5% of society, are 5 times more likely to have a brain injury. 5 times, so 5, 5, 5. Okay, so that sets you up already to have a disadvantage, right? So your socioeconomic disadvantage becomes a brain injury disadvantage, because you then may start school and you may not be the kid in the class that's able to really follow things quickly and understand what's going on. Make sense? Okay, so worldwide, about 1 in 10 people have had a traumatic brain injury. So just hold that in mind. 1 or 2 in 100 people have had a moderate to severe brain injury. So that's lifelong neurodisability, problems in attention, concentration, memory, due to a brain injury. Okay, so 1 or 2 in 100, but 8 to 10 people in 100, depends on where you are in the world, etc., have mild forms of brain injury, which may be associated with softer, more subtle types of neurodisability, problems in attention, concentration, but maybe not that's grossly obvious, but they're there to some extent. Yeah, does that make sense? Okay. So if you look around the world, where is the burden of traumatic brain injuries? We know that there's very good data on traumatic brain injury in North America, in Europe, and the weird countries, the Western industrial countries. So we know there's a lot of mild and moderate severe brain injury. But what about other countries? Well, we think if you look at the road traffic accident statistics, which is one of the main forms of traumatic brain injury, that it's enormous in the global south. So any organization working globally needs to be thinking about how do we understand, how do we try to reduce brain trauma globally? We need to be thinking about it because you've got 5 to 6 to 7 times higher rates of traumatic brain injury in global south. Especially where there's been changes in transport systems, more use of mopeds rather than bikes, going at higher speeds without wearing helmets, etc. Okay, I just want to mention that as we go through. Causes of brain injury. One of the key things that we want to try to do, and one of the aims of this meeting, is to think about how we can address things like traumatic brain injury, but also how can we reduce violence towards people, children, towards girls, women, particularly, how we can reduce violence. Violence reduction it prevents brain injury in and of itself, but also reduce the chances of these vicious cycles of problems over time. Violence is the third most common cause of brain trauma. In a major study of traumatic brain injury across Europe, about 6 or 7% of the causes of brain trauma was violence. In a study in China, it was 13% of the causes of brain injury was violence. So we need to reduce violence because violence produces brain trauma. And I'll come to a difficult issue in a bit to do with the links between how brain injury is associated with increased risk of violence. So therefore, we need to be thinking about that. One particular area of violence and brain trauma that's not been addressed as it should be, has been rather neglected, has been the way in which gender-based violence has a disproportionate effect on girls and women, which is an area that we really need to address in more systematic ways. There's a study in Australia showing that when compared to the causes of brain trauma due to interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence was much more common in its effects on women. So more women are affected by intimate partner violence. More often results in severe traumatic brain injury, and is nearly 3 times associated with mortality. So the consequences, I mean, yesterday Stan mentioned that we have to think about power. We have to think about power in terms of who has power, but also in society, how is power expressed, and how is power expressed and be able to also address an issue which has not been properly addressed, which is how we can reduce violence towards girls and women. Okay, so traumatic brain injury. You might be thinking, well, what is it? I'm hoping some of you are thinking what it is, and some of you already know what it is. So do you want me to tell you a bit more about what a traumatic brain injury is? Yeah, we're looking at, okay, good. Okay, well, this is kind of, as a neuropsychologist, it's kind of safer territory for me. I feel slightly kind of at my depth talking about policy and stuff and that sort of thing. So, we're drifting into areas that I've more knowledge of, sort of. So the top left picture over there is an image of brain systems. It's beautiful, isn't it? So that's an image of the connectivity of the brain. So that's the filaments, that's the axonal tracts that connect to the brain. So your brain is made up of these neurons, but also these connected tracts. The outer layer of your brain, the kind of the gray matter, the outer kind of centimeter, is your association cortex. That's where you make associations between things. You have hopefully made an association between the fact that I mentioned that I might want to run away across the lawn and jump on a boat and sail, right? And you maybe say, you might like to sail. I do. I'm trying to learn, but it's very dangerous activity to me because I'm rubbish at it. Anyway, where was I? Yes, so associations. You make associations in your gray matter. Your gray matter is association, and underneath that is your white matter. The white matter is where you have your bundles, all the cabling system for your brain, the gray matter, the white matter. Right, so your brain sits inside the skull. Here's a picture of the skull, looking into the skull. It's the basal part. You can see there's one main hole in the skull, and that's the hole where your spinal cord connects to your brainstem and then onto your brain. Okay, so that's your hole. So your brain sits inside the skull, which is a closed system. You know, skull is very good at protecting your brain from some of the stuff coming towards it. Okay, so your brain sits inside the skull. And just for a moment, just look at the inside of the skull there. This part of the skull, the top part on the inside is nice and smooth. The bottom part of the skull, over here, basal part, is jaggedy. A bit like the mountains of Switzerland, jaggedy, right? Jaggedy on the inside. Okay, so on the left there, you've got an image of a brain inside the skull. And now imagine one of my patients, when he's working in Liverpool, he's been mistaken for a gang member. He's walking down the street, baseball bat to the back of the head. He's bashed to the ground. The baseball, switch hands, okay. Here we are. Baseball bat, back of the head. So, there's impact over here. That impact creates contusions towards of the brain on this area. But as the brain shudders forwards, the brain hits the inside on the opposite side of the skull. Contrecoup injury. So there's here and there. As he falls and hits the head on the ground, then there's further injuries as he moves around and then gets a kicking. So there's a kicking to the head and so on and so forth. So you've got a number of areas, localized injury inside the brain. What's also happening? Well, the brain's moving inside the skull a little bit. So these beautiful filaments, diffuse white matter tracts that connect up the brain, can be disconnected. So your connections are starting to get lost. Either they get broken or they get less efficient in working. So that's happening. Another thing happening is, and I'm sorry, it's a bit graphic, as the brain's sitting on this in the skull, on jaggedy tissue, skull tissue, the moving around means that the brain is acting like jello or jelly on the cheese grater, moving around. Yeah, is that visual enough? Okay, so there we are. Okay, so the point I'm trying to get across is that brain trauma is so invisible because it's hidden. It's inside here. It's visible in the behavior that comes from it. If society doesn't allow you a way to somehow understand the behavior and offers an alternative to get your attention or what have you. Okay, so therefore we end up with typically brain injuries affect these regions of the brain. Okay, so they affect the areas of the brain to do with memory. So that's the temporal lobes, and language, temporal lobes of the brain, the sides and the underside. The frontal lobes, especially the underside of the frontal lobes, which is to do with, as we were hearing, decision-making, impulse control, planning ahead. In children and young people, they're even more likely to get injuries that impact on their limbic system. So urge states, motivational states, and the linkages between them. As you can see, this is looking up at the brain from underneath. So these systems for feeling, recognizing feeling, and acting on feeling rather than being disinhibited gets affected. Does that make sense? Can I just ask you now then, can you start to think about the people that you have worked with at some point and the young people you worked with? What kinds of, we would call as psychologists, presentations or behavior, how would you describe the kind of ways in which they may have difficulties? Would they be things like being irritable, frustration tolerance, being problematic, not really remembering what they've been told, being easily distracted, all that kind of stuff? Does that make sense? Okay. So if your hardware is affected, then it's hard for your software to run, isn't it? Yeah? Okay. So in terms of brain trauma, moderate severe brain injury, and these are not brilliant ways of categorizing, but if you have a loss of consciousness of 20 or 30 minutes or more, then that's a moderate to severe brain trauma. We know you're much more likely not to have long-term problems. If it's a milder form of injury, then you may well have ongoing problems, but largely they're resolved, especially if it's about up to 5 minutes loss of consciousness, unless it's been repeated. So who gets repeated brain trauma? When you think about it, who gets injured on a regular basis? Are you, sorry? Women. Yeah. So that's a massive issue. So in one study we did, I think James was me and you, I can't remember, but it's only your analysis, I think, showing that if you have 3 mild brain injuries, that's like a moderate severe brain injury. It just builds up. Recent work in New York showing causes of death in women who relatively appear to be in relatively good health, in relatively early middle age, showing signs of repeated mild brain injury in context of intimate partner violence. So it's such a big issue that needs to be addressed more effectively. Okay, so being mindful of time, and I know I'm taking up a lot of our time, I'm sorry, but just to, is that okay? Carry on? No, okay, right. So brain trauma then can lead to changes in the way that somebody is able to feel, to think about themselves, and gives there's what we might call a personality change, organic personality change. But of course, remember, the brain was developing at the time. And one of the problems for us as neuropsychologists in terms of understanding, changes in brain systems is there wasn't a baseline. We don't know what they're going to be like in future. We don't really know. We can't compare a child's current functioning with a previous function because, well, they could have been, they're 12 now and a kid of 10 is very different to 12. Another big thing is that adolescence is such a time of brain change and development that you're more vulnerable to having a brain injury during adolescence, but also their brain injury is more consequential. You don't grow out of it. Other forms of brain trauma, neuroplasticity can really help the brain develop, but very often in traumatic brain injury, we don't really know what the impact may be for years later. I'm looking to Mathilde now. Years later, we might not know what the consequences are of those brain injuries. So in kids in general, after a moderate severe brain injury, about 60% have been shown to have personality changes. So dysexecutive, which means not being able to plan ahead, think things through, self-regulate, that sort of thing. They may have problems in frustration tolerance issues, and they may also have mood disorders, so anxiety. We've done work showing how often people with brain injury have post-traumatic stress disorder. If you can think about the guy who was being battered by that gang in Liverpool. Now, after mild brain injuries, there's also consequences, and about 20% may have problems that are like ADHD, attention deficit disorder, also other forms of apparent neurodisability. And this concept, oppositional defiant disorder. Oppositional defiant disorder. In other words, not being able to do what we're being asked to do. So therefore appearing to be oppositional, but you don't understand what we're being asked to do. But you're now being labeled with the problem you were telling us about earlier, be labeled with oppositional defiant disorder. Well, thank you very much. So it's brain trauma associated with these issues. Mental health wise and conduct disorders. A really important study in the States showing that when there's a brain trauma, there was much greater likelihood of psychological distress in kids compared to kids without brain injury between 12 to 18 years of age. It's in a study with 5,000 kids-ish. But look at that, attempting suicide, adjusted odds ratio 3. That means you're 3 times more likely to attempt suicide, 3 times. Massive, risk. Then you have TBI has higher odds of being victimized. So now you behave in a slightly different kind of way. You're not as with it as all the other kids, and the kids then start to maybe pick on you. Yeah. And what do you do to defend yourself? You might start carrying a weapon. And what then happens next? So it goes. So being victimized, threatened with a weapon, odds ratios, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to start to have these social problems. And James is going to tell us more about peer relationship problems later. So risk of crime, this is a difficult area because what then seems to occur is that there's a risk of ending up in the criminal justice system for issues to do with violence. And I tend to argue this to do with reactive violence, reactive aggression, not being able to tolerate frustration, not being able to understand what's going on, not know what's going on around you. So you end up reacting badly to situations. This is one of the most powerful studies in psychiatry, I would argue, and public health, by Sina Fussell in Oxford, looking at the total population of Sweden over about 30 years. And what you find is that if you look at the registers for health conditions and crime, you find that about 2% of Swedes end up being violent offenders. If in their records there's a brain injury, then 9% of those people became violent offenders. Okay. And I'm sorry if the term is offensive about being violent offenders, because these are vulnerable people. So there we are. What Sina then did is he compared the siblings of the people with brain injury who became violent offenders to the other groups, and found that they were also at an elevated risk of violent crime. So 4.5% of the siblings of the brain injured violent offenders were also people who ended up in the criminal justice system. So in other words, a brain trauma changes your life trajectory if you don't have the risk factors for violent crime, triples your risk. And if you already have the risk factors, it doubles your risk. Yeah, does that make sense? So if you think back to what we were saying earlier about the frontal brain systems and temporal lobes and all the rest of it, no wonder, because your hardware isn't able to cope with what's going on around you through a developmental period. Okay. This is a study from Denmark from last year before. I think it's one, again, a really powerful study. Effectively, 6 population register data sets, very large data sets, and all Danes. Any Danes here, by the way? No? Okay, so all of the Danes over 25 plus years, and linking up this database, and what they found was that a brain injury increased the chances of problems in life dramatically. So violent crime up by 2.5 kind of odds. So in other words, 2 to 3 times more likely to commit a crime. But also, incredibly important, suicide was up dramatically. You're 2 to 3 times more likely to kill yourself. And they found that, looking at some of the registers, the data in the register, that the indicators of changes in the frontal lobes being dysexecutive, so not being able to plan ahead, not being impulsive, was a sign that someone is going to be more at risk of suicidality, for example. And they reckon that you can reduce the number of violent crime incidents by 1 in 12 and suicide by 1 in 8 if you picked up on traumatic brain injury. Okay, so that's why this area is, I think, particularly important. So, any questions so far? No? Oh, okay.
In the patients that I have, I see a lot of these things of conduct, but I also see like ability to compensate, like creativity things, like with music, with artistic representation.
Yeah.
So my question is like, you're talking about where the consequences if you have an injury in that part of the brain and the other part, but I also realized that our parts, I don't know which part, are parts of the brain that wakes up.
So there could be ways in which people start to develop other ways of compensating for problems that they've experienced. I can come back to that in a moment if that's all right, but I think that's an incredibly important point. What are the strengths that we can help people with and develop? Okay. Oh, yep. Yep.
When childhood or adolescence, thanks to the neuroplasticity, we have chance if we are taking care of the child during this period.
Yep.
To make, I would not say completely resolve the issue, but to help.
That's a great question as well. So thank you. Yeah, brilliant. So is there a chance that because the injury is happening at a point of neuroplasticity and change, do we have an opportunity to create some action that can have long-term benefits for the child to then have a bit of a rewiring happen? Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. And yes, in short, to some extent, but at the same time, we have to be careful around, especially in adolescence, because there isn't a magic curative effect or just maturation. It needs to be supported. That's the point. So that's why access to appropriate services, education, and not be incarcerated is particularly important, because what's good for brain development, as we've been hearing earlier as well, is not being under threat. If you're under threat, so it's a bit of a segue, isn't it? Sorry, but if you're under threat, what happens is that brain system, or the hippocampal system, which is so important for memory, which is your connecting point between your frontal lobes and your temporal lobes, atrophy or reorientate towards, you don't really need your hippocampal system the same way, because you just need to know, am I in danger? Am I in danger? So that's why adverse childhood experiences are associated with brain systems where you have smaller hippocampal system, smaller, and the connections between the hemispheres are less rich. So there is that modification through social enculturation. So if you put children into incarcerated sort of settings, what they are around? They're around threat. They're not around positive experiences for brain development. And one of the most positive experience for brain development is, anybody want to take a guess? Play. Play and love. I say that because it's about warmth, and so on. So parental warmth. So many of these kids don't have parental warmth. They don't have the family system. So what do they have? They have a state that becomes the family. And does that state actually, engage in a warm manner? Not necessarily, right? They want to punish you for doing something on a regular basis. So positive parenting, warmth is important. Play is important. Play is incredibly important. Lots of really good studies across animals showing how you get richer dendritic and axonal growth in conditions where if you take, do you mind me going off on a tangent? Is this okay? Just checking my audience is all right. Okay, well, going for Cedric, are you okay with this?
Yes.
Okay, right. So if you put a rat in a box by itself when he's young, a rat in a box with an adult rat when he's young, and a rat in a box with another adolescent rat, and you leave them to it for a while, and they go through their adolescence, you find, and then unfortunately they die, well, won't tell you why, and then you look at the brains of the adolescent rats who were growing up together have richer brain systems, yeah, because they were playing, they were searching, they were being, so the links are, you need to have emotional attachment to others that provides you a sense of safety in the world, that allows you to be curious about the world, to be able to develop your brain system. Now, it's a long way around of saying, yes, there's opportunity in the developing brain, but you can't just wait for it to mature. You need the inputs for it to mature. Otherwise, it will probably decay or adapt itself towards what it needs to deal with. It needs to optimize itself for danger. There's just one, if we did a study, I don't know if there is a study yet, but if we did a study looking at kids who grew up in incarcerated states, over time, you probably would find these, changes in brain systems to do with fight or flight. Be more tuned in. There's lovely work in Harvard by T-Shaw and colleagues on those systems and change over time, if you'd like to know more. Right, shall I carry on? But come back to that. So that's why exactly why we need a neuroplasticity informed, neurodevelopmentally informed model for the support and engagement of children in contact with the law. Therefore, we can enable their brain systems to become optimized for being able to socialize, not to be fearful. Yeah. So I'm going to find myself going off another segue in a minute, but I'll shush and carry on. Right. So this is a study in New Zealand that I find very helpful to think about policy when it comes to children and brain trauma. There's a longitudinal follow-up study, birth cohort study, tracking kids over time. And what they find, if children have a brain injury under 5, remember 555? Yeah, okay. Children have a brain injury under 5 in Christchurch. Within about a year after that, they're fine. Within 2 years after that, they're in school. They're not so fine. They start to show problems in being fidgety, They're not really paying attention that well. They drift towards the back of the class. By the time they're 9, they start to get labeled with having kind of issues. By the time they're 11, 12, they start to get excluded from school. By the time they're 14, they're more likely to be in contact with the law for stuff like vandalism, property damage, and so on and so forth. So my question usually when I mention that is, well, what can you do then to reduce the chances of criminalization of kids after brain injury? How much, I'm not going to ask how much it costs to come to a beautiful place by a lake. I'll ask you, how much would it cost to go off on to a nice hotel near here with a beautiful lakeside view? How much would it cost for a weekend? Too much. Thank you, Cedric. Anyway, but how much would it cost? 200 euros, 300 euros, 400 euros? How much? I'm looking at Stan. He's got very expensive taste. 500 euros. Okay. So one night in a young offender unit in the UK costs £640 a night. How much does it cost to have a teaching assistant in a classroom? The economics just make, it just makes it look ridiculous, doesn't it? That we are spending money to incarcerate kids when we could be spending money to support and educate kids to become socialized. And what's the purpose of schools? Anyway, I'll go on too much. Sorry. Well, what's the purpose of school? We did a study on young kids who have come through our systems, in UK, young offender units in UK, of which about 45% had a knockout history, of which that knockout history was associated with greater reactive kind of violence. And you look back in their lives, and what you also find is if they had a head injury, they were much more likely to have been excluded from school. So we can go, classroom to prison pipeline, or the Amazon conveyor belts, and it's a lack of a system. That's the problem, isn't it? And I'm looking at Stan. So in the UK, we have things like county lines, which is the way in which predatory crime groups utilize children who are vulnerable because they can, but also they can utilize them because they can separate them off from their peers because they haven't really got much in the way of peers left and all the rest of it. Anyway, so we need to fix that problem. And Hope over here, the first published papers, we found looking at the same population of the kids within our young offender units. If you look at their parenting histories, did anybody care if you're home late? Did anybody reward you for doing your homework? Did anybody do X, Y, Z? And what you find, and many of the kids, about 40% didn't have a family system to come from. They were more from a social care background. If they had neglectful style parenting, nobody cared. They're more likely to have head injuries with a loss of consciousness, and they're more likely to be in young offender units for reactive aggression. They'd responded badly to a situation. Yeah, does it make sense? Okay. Oh, great. Okay, good. So in general, then, people in the criminal justice system are not sometimes with neurostability or trauma. They are mostly with neurostability and trauma, one way or another, disproportionately. This is the population that we are all working with. The staff that we need in these systems need the qualities, the qualification and support to be working with children and young people with these issues. That's it. They're not different. It's not a different population. They're not a small part of the population that you work with. So we need to be much better at identifying the issues, diverting, deflecting these kids away from the criminal justice system, because that's not going to be good for their brain health, and that's not going to be good for their social well-being. Of course, there's issues around social protection, but we need to balance these things up. The education and health and social interventions are vital. I can tell you more about the financial modeling behind that as well, if you like. But I think I need to leave it there and maybe bring in Lee. Is that right? Okay, cool. So I'm going to bring in Lee, who is a colleague of mine at University of Cape Town in South Africa.
Sorry.
Oh, great.
While we're connecting, is there any comment or questions for you? No, Des?
Thank you very much.
Which one late?
It's, yeah,
This one.
thanks for an interesting presentation. Question is, well, with all the studies that you've showed, of course, that there is this relation between traumatic brain injury and then when you were
That's
discussing
okay.
about implementing
I'm
the
wishing.
virus as an example of who is suffering, I suppose there are also studies of child abuse actually at home. So
Sorry?
You make me host, I'm also in the
but
meeting,
not
so maybe I can
only
help
from,
also
and
to
I
turn
just
on.
missed a bit on
You
that,
just need
slide before.
You just need to go
Not
speak to
only on the
participant,
physical abuse, but
and
also
after
we know that
there is all name.
in the brain,
Host, I don't
from
have
neglect or
features.
emotional abuse.
You want I promote you?
There are also studies
Where
that
are you?
This
Yes.
sort of having a different type of brain injury, which is not a physical injury, but it is an atrophy in the brain.
Yeah.
Thank you for your it's
Normally, that's
and
you can
that is
accept on your
so
laptop.
effectively you're more likely to
I
have
invite
these
you,
types of brain injuries
and
that are
normally you can accept.
child experiences,
You're
because
Thank you very
they're
much.
also associated with differential brain developmental trajectory. Yeah, in other words, you may have more likelihood of less connectivity between the hemispheres and hippocampal volume being smaller. So Lee and I have a study in Cape Town trying to identify which patterns of brain systems are associated more with adverse emotional environments and which are more to do with brain trauma. But it's likely to be, it's going to be additive, so you get effects from both. Yeah. So then you end up with both maybe poorer memory. And one of the key things that might link to what James is going to talk about is the tendency towards reacting quickly and unconsciously to threat. So you pick up in a neutral face. So focus, look at me with neutral face. Oh, you're now smart. But if you're looking at neutral face, I might see that slight irritation in the face and oh my God, so I avoid. So kids with conduct disorder tend to have that bias. And that bias is stronger because that's what you've grown up with, and therefore you're looking for, you unconsciously looking for it. So there's nice interventions to change that.
Exactly, that is the way actually having these kind of studies, which would help quite a lot into
asking about what's isn't there counter-optimized neuroplasticity for that happens? Yes, you can. We need to invest. We need to invest in neuroplasticity as best as we can. We need to get social policy aligned with neuroplasticity.
And even also in understanding on all the actually the social environment where you are born with, and how does this lead, and actually there is a correlation.
Big macro picture all the way down to individual. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hugh, if he is not on immediately, I was wondering if you also maybe wanted to comment a little bit about the anoxic form of brain injury from attempted strangulation, primarily among IPD survivors.
She's not here.
Yes, of course. Yes. Do you want to comment on that? I think that's a bit of an I will hope. Okay, so in the which is it's anoxic injuries are also common. So that's strangulation, head health underwater, and in the children or people you're also working with, there will be other causes of these problems in brain being able to get oxygen and glucose. So your brain needs oxygen. 20% of available oxygen in your body goes to the brain constantly, and if it's disrupted supply, then that leads to atrophy of the brain. And the absence of problems after and I described it here, but when we look at women in prison, 60% of women in prison have traumatic brain injuries. Similar to the rates of traumatic brain injury in men. The main cause pretty much of brain injuries in women in prison is from partner violence. And the other big issue is that they don't tend to know that they have one. So only about in one study we found only about 5% understood what we meant. And so, have you had a brain injury? No, I think so. Well, have you had a loss of consciousness? Oh, yeah, of course.
Ariana?
Well, how often? Well, one day, 3 or 4 times in one day. How about this injury? Well, it was so no, it was pretty bad because I couldn't see my own face in the mirror. So, you know, to get it, there's a lot of those injuries and strangulation. You have a different maybe pattern of memory problem. Yes, talking to police officers and being able to get a story straight is difficult when you are a victim of these kinds of issues because your memory might be, you know, a bit hazy and not fully.
We cannot hear that.
So if you ask somebody, have you been strangled, they will say no, because they don't understand what you mean by strangled. So you have to have quite a long description to get the information you need in the first place. Yeah, it's not straightforward. Often use the term choking. Strangle, it's not saying a non-fatal strangulation.
This is stop sharing, right? Yes.
Imagine that's a big area to working through how we
Or stop
document
recording.
it, and then able to identify it.
Gathering information is really tough because you have to go to the point on the description.
Thanks, Tana. And thank you for that. I'm hoping, I do not mean to show of hands, I'm hoping that if Cedric and Mariana and Hope are going to follow up with this meeting. We would like to follow up, I think, around gender-based violence and issues around that. Okay, now I'm very pleased to see you, Lee. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi Hugh, hi everyone. I can't see your video at the moment. I can only see whoever's online.
Volume one's going up now, so can you hear me now?
Can you speak, please?
You can hear
Hello,
us?
hello.
Yeah.
Hey,
Oh.
Right.
I can hear you clearly. I just lost the view of whomever's in the room.
Yeah.
Well,
Is your video still on?
Yeah, it is. But if you don't mind to proceed, because we are
Fine.
barely,
Yes, I know you're running pretty late.
technologically, disconnected. So it's better that we go ahead if you don't mind. Sorry for that.
Okay. I'll imagine all of you sitting there. Hello,
We'll
everyone.
send you a picture.
It's fine. I saw the video earlier. So hi everyone, I'll be quick. I don't have a presentation to share. It's really great to be able to be part of this workshop. So thank you for having me and for accommodating those of us who cannot be there online. Appreciate it. So I'll just be quick with a few comments. My understanding was I was meant to just, to comment on the roundtable discussion. It's already been quite intriguing listening to the talk so far, and it's only been a couple of hours. So I'll just say my points very quickly, given the time. So I was reading the policy document we were sent in preparation for this meeting, and just to say a few things on that. Firstly, I'm Lee Shreve-Brown. I am an associate professor at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. I'm a neuropsychologist and an academic, and I've always had an interest in traumatic brain injuries in children and rehabilitation. And then I started working with Hugh and with a few others in the room that I've interacted with and been in discussions with. And you and I started working together on, like you said, on the young offenders and neurodisabilities in South Africa. I'm sure all of you are probably well aware of the contextual issues in this country, but just to highlight them once again and how it's relevant to listening to this meeting and the points that have been made so far. That South Africa is fraught with crime, as you well know, but it's also fraught with a range of neurodisabilities, traumatic brain injury being one of them, the pertinent ones, but a range of others, including fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, the consequences, the neuropsychological consequences and behavioral consequences of HIV, and a range of others. And I think what's important, given what's said so far, and I'll just draw on some of the points that have been raised and what's pertinent to these contexts and also others. And I know we're speaking about a range, or globally, this issue around brain injuries, around neurodisabilities generally, and crime and the interaction of these. But I want to draw attention particularly to countries where, like ours, where these sorts of issues are exacerbated because of the contextual vulnerabilities. So lots been said about adverse childhood experiences and how these place youth at particular risk for pathways to, offending behavior. And those are particularly, while youth are at particular risk in this context, given a range of adverse childhood experiences that they may be exposed to. So people often speak about these double hazards, but in terms of neurodisability and exposure to these adverse childhood experiences. But here, this is a multiple hazard environment that place youth at risk. A couple of other points I thought were very important that were raised so far with the speaker, the introductory speaker this morning. Two of the big points there, I think, are the bidirectional effects of neurodisability to crime, but then being within the criminal justice system and exacerbation of neurodisabilities, and to turn our direction there. Also, in the policy paper, you spoke a lot about how we manage neurodisabilities with youth within the criminal justice system. But I think in environments that place youth at particular risk, turning our attention to the preventative strategies, before they reach the criminal justice system is particularly pertinent, especially when we know that youth are in environments that put them at risk that might place them there in the near future. And then the other important point also being the continuum of neurodisability, that using these diagnostic categories of either yes, having neurodisability, or no, not having one, is problematic, because, if you don't meet the criteria for a neurodisability and yet you're probably at risk for one or very close to, meeting those diagnostic categories is not helpful. So viewing it on a continuum is particularly important. And then, I think just taking stock that kids find themselves, at risk with neurodisabilities in the criminal justice system, but even, the kids who face a great deal, sorry, it's difficult speaking into the vacuum, kids who find themselves in these vulnerable environments are even vulnerable outside of the criminal justice system, and before they reach that point. And so it's a call for, bringing these sort of collective voices together and learning through this workshop, which is why I'm, very grateful to be participating in it, and thinking about ways that we can address these problems both inside the criminal justice system and before that, in terms of kids reaching that point. Just one final point. Hope spoke earlier about thinking about the social model, and I think it's particularly pertinent in these sorts of environments. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. If I'm pressing the button right here, thank you very much. I'm talking into the void, but we're all listening intently. Thank you very much. Multitasking for the thing. Thank you. And just
stand between you and your coffee, so I think you're going to run over time.
You're going to come back with some conversation after you've had a bit more to go through. Is that right? So Lucy will return with a few more comments go along. Justice in the UK and other experiences from the worldwide. So I guess now we need to turn towards coffee. Okay, so okay, good. Thank you.
Sometimes you know we speak your language.
Just see something. After there is but all these people are not on the.
No, they are not. So the
M'entends,
next
Joris?
person will be here. Is that? But like, what we wanna kind of fix, like maybe you can use me as an example.
I will show if I can.
Tu m'entends,
And-
Joris?
Oui.
Parfait. Alors, bah, là, j'ai Late Shreve Brown. Sa mec, elle peut activer sa caméra, mais elle est fermée.
Ouais, non, mais ça c'est tout bon. Mais c'est fini, elle a fini.
C'est qui les autres alors?
Bah, essaye de mettre Mariana Pérez en admin si tu peux.
Là, je lui ai envoyé la demande. Normalement, elle peut accepter. Ouais.
Ah, mais tu l'as ajouté en panéliste, Sam.
Ouais, c'est possible. Voilà, c'est bon, là, elle est en panéliste normalement.
Oui, mais est-ce qu'elle peut ajouter des personnes?
Je sais pas.
Parce qu'elle n'est pas haute.
Ouais, il faudrait qu'elle soit co-haute.
Ouais, co-haute.
Euh,
Est-ce que toi, vu que t'es l'hôte en haut, tu peux promouvoir en co-haute?
C'est ça, non, je peux pas là. Non, mais de toute façon, là, j'ai accès depuis en haut.
Ah si,
donc
moi je peux nommer co-haute. Hein.
Tu peux, toi? Ah bah oui, vas-y.
Ouais.
Mets la
Je
co-haute.
nomme co-haute.
Voilà, parfait.
Normally, now you can add.
Yeah, ouais, les co-hautes là.
Et Sam, tu peux venir voir parce que le monsieur veut mettre son.
Sa présentation?
Ouais.
Alors, tu prends une clé USB, il y en a sur le bureau. Donc,
Ok.
il en a une, lui, ou pas?
You have one or. Je prends celle qui est sur le.
Ouais, voilà, tu la mets dessus et après, il y a un dossier Workshop 4 sur
Alors,
le bureau.
2 secondes, Sam,
du
2
PC.
secondes.
So I can see now myself, but I see nothing. And it's supposed to be like, I'm supposed to see the room, you know?
Hmm,
And how can we see like the speakers and the room at the same time?
Normally, you can. It's.
C'est quoi la question?
Pour mettre la caméra tu sais, devant là, où on voit tout le monde.
Alors,
C'est la caméra.
Elle a activé ta caméra?
Ah, c'est la Logitech Meetup, mais.
Ouais, des fois, elle se déconnecte. Donc, tu enlèves sur la gauche, tu as le premier USB. C'est un câble noir, tu l'enlèves et tu le remets et après, tu la reconnectes. Après, tu la resélectionnes, normalement, ça va s'afficher.
Ouais, mais elle ne peut pas. Yeah, you can take it.
Elle détecte pas?
Non, la Logitech, non, attends, vous allez brancher dans le brancher. Mais...
Depuis l'ordi, hein, pas depuis la caméra. Sur l'ordi, tu as l'adaptateur sur la gauche, c'est le câble noir. Un USB type A. Normal, les gros USB, tu sais.
Ouais, mais là, je le débranche, je le rebranche.
Et après, tu vas en bas et tu sélectionnes ton petit trait, tu mets Logitech, normalement, ça va le détecter.
Ouais, là, elle est déjà connectée, hein, mais juste, elle marche pas.
Ou sinon, tu as le type de galerie en haut à gauche de l'interface Zoom. Normalement, là, ça affiche une personne, c'est ça? Ou moi qui parle.
Là, c'est écrit Fondation est en train de parler.
Ok, attends, en gros, tu vas, parce qu'on est en immersif. Attends, j'arrive.
You can add it.
Yeah, Gilmore. Which Geneva Gilmore.
Okay, nice. Oui, let's just see for the moment, yeah.
Take this one.
Ah, la caméra
Alors,
vite.
c'est ça.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. No, like, mais c'est bon là.
Ouais.
No, no, it's good.
Which one is this?
Uh,
Which
you-
camera? Like which video?
Yes, this is you have two options,
Logitech Meetup.
but this is the Logitech
Logitech
Meetup.
Meetup, okay.
If you want, I can give you also the controller to move the camera as you want, or we can,
So this is the camera that
Yeah.
we have.
yes, as you want.
Okay.
Maybe move this. Excuse. Voilà, c'est où la présentation du gars?
On va
Move it maybe to here. Or no? Can we move it from place or no?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Why do you-
Normally we have the speakers.
Okay, so
Ah, mais
as you
alors, mais
want,
celle-ci. hein.
look,
Ouais.
I will show you another option.
This one.
So there is two camera. So this one is supposed to be for the room.
Mm.
And you have this one, the small one.
Mhm.
You switch, and this is the Ubisoft.
Mhm.
Let's return off. Yes, that's us. And yes, this is this camera, and then you can switch if you want to. So this one is upset, just right there, and the Logitech is for the room.
Okay.
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 But I mean, if you are coach, you can switch this maybe. I'm not sure, but try it. No, only your camera. Yes.
But
Yeah, so
you can
you
add some people and some people to talk now, like your host.
yes, because for this afternoon the participants are not here yet. Yes, yes.
Montre-lui comment faire vite.
Promote the panel.
On est là, yeah.
From your computer.
And then just tell the speakers here that they just speak and
Yes.
the camera. Okay, thank you. Sorry for boring.
Oh no, don't
Non, c'est
worry.
la présentation de.
Right. And the next one is this guy.
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll. Perfect.
But I have to share my screen out here.
Oh, he's not sharing.
No.
Ça fait quoi là?
It's not working. Maybe there's some delay. Wait.
Ah, ça me j'ai pas le plein écran, mais ça marche. Ah, c'est bon? Ah, c'est bon là.
Perfect.
Okay,
Mais depuis le début.
Everything is working.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Wait.
All is good?
He's not going now, but
Ah, okay.
So I will put the presentation workshop for, okay?
yep.
Ah, mais je peux pas la. Tu l'as enregistré sur le bureau, la présentation?
Non, mais toi, tu la mets juste en bas ou quoi, tu vois.
Ah, parce que normalement, elles sont toutes là, en fait. Je les glisse dedans.
Ah, tu l'enregistres après.
Je peux pas, vu que c'est une version juste.
Tu peux la déplacer, je pense. Sinon, tu l'as fait ça, tu la partages. Oui, faire un PDF. Tu l'exportes.
Et s'il a des.
Pareil par mail.
Bon, c'était quel le gars?
Guillemot.
Tu te rappelles à quoi il ressemble?
Ouais.
On va lui redemander ça. Il a utilisé notre clé?
Hein?
Il a utilisé notre clé?
Ouais, elle ou elle, la comp, non?
Ah, ouais, non,
Non, c'est pas de la dessus. Elle, Geneva Guillemot.
Parfait.
Ah, elle était déjà.
Il était déjà. Mais là, Jim l'a déjà donné. Peut-être qu'il l'a modifié.
Ah, mais t'as mis remplacé?
Ouais.
C'est le monsieur. Je peux peut-être lui prévenir. Peut-être lui prévenir qu'elle est là.
Ouais, je vais lui dire.
Là, elle est dans Workshop 4.
Ouais.
Montre. Je vais lui dire quoi?
Ouais, vas-y. T'es sûr que c'était Guillemot, hein?
If you look for your presentation, it is Workshop 4.
I'm in
Just
workshop
inside.
3, yeah.
No, 4. Just inside
It's
this.
in 4 there, is okay, all right.
And after you,
Workshop 4.
And have you
Yeah,
changed
like-
it for the
Yes.
previous one? Yeah,
Yes.
you deleted the previous.
Yeah, we changed it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Bon, ouais, c'est parfait. Voilà. Welcome. I have a question for tonight for the diners. How many will be?
I sent you the link, right?
Yes.
Like I sent you like the final participants, and it's like the first sheet is like normal, and then the second sheet says meals.
I didn't see the meal sheet, I think.
Then there's
This is in the final list of participants.
Yes.
There is 2 sheets.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, thank you
Perfect.
very much.
Now, welcome.
while she's doing that, I would like to invite you, because I'm going to be talking about something today called cognitive communication, as well as social communication and social cognition. And I'd like you all to think about what your brains are doing in this meeting. So you're all here. You have goal-directed behavior because you have intact executive functions. So we are all here for a collective purpose. Each of us brings a different viewpoint, a different expertise, but collectively we are aiming to have share and exchange information and have some discussion to move forward, to inform policy and create interventions. You're able to pay attention to me, hopefully, how you slept last night, what you ate for breakfast this morning. All of those factors will inform how you're able to follow today. For those of you who took part in the simulation yesterday, I'd like you to imagine trying to participate in this meeting under those conditions. Okay, so for those of you who weren't there, it was a simulation of what children and youth experience being shuffled throughout the system with loud noise and chaos and food insecurity and history of trauma and having doors closed on them repeatedly. So think about that and think about how that might impact your ability to experience these meetings today. So we have an agenda for this morning. I think there's a little bit of feedback here. Is anyone else hearing that? Or is that, is there anything that I can do to, I can back up? It's still, okay. If it is, please let me know. So we have a couple of aims for this session. First of all, to consider how unmet clinical needs among the children and youth lead to harsher sanctions in prison probation courtrooms. And I thank Hope and Hugh for setting this up so beautifully and providing such a fantastic background. And then also to talk about how comorbid needs have an impact. I think that's better. Thank you. So I was asked specifically to talk to you a little bit about cognition, cognitive communication, language and literacy, and social cognition. Those are the areas that I focus on with implications for the criminal justice system. So as was beautifully explained by Hugh, all of these are neurodevelopmental processes. And again, they evolve over time. And as Hugh spoke about, we see peaks in brain maturation, and then we see valleys, and then we see peaks. And so all of these peak times are periods of particular vulnerability to injury. So as our brain regions mature, and Hugh spoke about the fact that our frontal lobes are the last to really fully come online and continue to develop really probably until our mid to maybe even late 20s now. And with that, we see the increased functional connectivity. And Hugh showed you that beautiful slide of the DTI, the diffuse and tensor imaging with all the colors of all. So that is what the connectivity looks like. So that increases over time. It can also decrease and deteriorate and degenerate in response to moderate severe brain injury, as well as repeat hits to the head. Okay, I guess I have to go this way. So when we're talking about cognition and communication, these are the things we're speaking about. And again, think about how you are using them in this meeting. So, and this is also hierarchical. So at the very sort of bottom of the hierarchy is our ability to perceive. So we're operating on the fact that all of you can see and you can hear. So those are two really important things right at the basis. So you're able to perceive information. So then you're able to attend to the information. And you may find that your attention is fluctuating over time because maybe you're tired, you're jet lagged. I know I flew from Canada, so I'm on a different time zone. Not only that, you are processing a lot of information. And I think this is a really important concept to understand. So when we think about information processing, that is the brain's ability to take in information, interpret it, incorporate it into what we already know, and then act upon it. And there are three ways that we process information is processed in terms of speed. So for those of you who English may not be your first language, it may be a little harder for you to keep up with the speed of presentations today. The second is the amount of information. So by the end of the day, and by the end of the day yesterday, when you're tired and you've had a lot of new information at you, your processing capacity is decreased. And then the other is the complexity of the information. So for some of you, what we're speaking about today, or the neuroscience, is you're familiar with it, so it's less complex. Others of you, it's new information, and so it's more complex. And again, the processing will be a little bit slower and maybe a little bit more challenging. In addition, we look at memory, but we also look at memory and learning. So the ability to take in all of this information and organize it in the brain in a way that it makes sense and that we can use it to do something with it. So our executive functions play a big role in that. And Hugh and Hope did a beautiful job of explaining what those are. An important part of executive functions is also our working memory. So keeping in mind that goal-directed behavior as to why we're all here today. And then on top of that, we have what we call social cognition. And I'm going to explain more about what social cognition is. Now, on the other side, I have here communication. So language is the coding system and the content, but communication is actually much broader. So listening is not just about, oh, I can hear you. It's about, I can hear you, but I can also understand what you're saying. So it's that auditory comprehension. In terms of speaking, speech itself is an actual motor process that involves our breathing, our lips, our tongue, our motor neurons, etc. So I can speak fine. And if I have a brain injury, most of the time I can speak and I can talk, but the content and the way I express myself is often compromised. So speaking, do I have the vocabulary? Do I have the ability to find the word? We all have that experience, particularly when we're tired. I can't think of the word I want to say. People with brain injuries have that all the time. Discourse, our ability to organize and express ourselves in a coherent manner, to tell stories, to create a narrative. So in order to do that, I need all of my cognitive abilities. I need my intact executive functions. I need the organization and planning in order to have good discourse. Otherwise, I won't be making sense to you. Our conversational interaction is a very important part of communication, and it goes so much beyond the content, and I will talk to you about that. We also have to think about reading, literacy, not just the ability for the person to scan and sound out the words, but whether or not they can actually comprehend. Writing. Writing often mirrors expressive communication in people with brain injuries, as well as social communication. So these are very intertwined systems and they operate simultaneously. So what exactly then is cognitive communication? So as I said, cognition and communication are not mutually exclusive. They're interdependent and they're reciprocal. And as I said, language is the primary mode of thought and verbal reasoning. So Hugh used the very important example this morning of self-talk. And as children develop, the language abilities as well as the very early executive functions, they learn the ability to say what I said to myself when I came up here: you've got this, Catherine, you can do this, and we all use that, right? Except when we're tired, or maybe we've had a little too much wine or whatever. So we mostly think in terms of language. we also think visually, but language is very important for verbal reasoning. So we talked about the interrelation of cognition and communication, and the term cognitive communication disorders, unfortunately, it is not in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders, but it is an official diagnostic category within speech and language. It refers to impairments or challenges with any aspect of communication due to underlying cognitive impairments or disabilities. So for example, if you have problems with attention, you're going to lose a lot of what I'm saying. Okay. If you have problems with memory, you might be able to follow, but then you'll walk out of here and you'll be like, I have no idea what she was talking about. Social communication is an extremely important part of the whole communication process. And social communication is often compromised following or in children and youth with neurodisability. So our social communication refers to the ways in which our language, as well as our nonverbal communication, is used within social situations. And one of the most beautiful things about Hugh, who I value so much as a colleague, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to work with you, Hugh, is Hugh has really wonderful social communication abilities. He has the ability to really see people and to make everyone feel valued and special, and he refers to other people's work, and he's a really great social communicator. Now, some people are inherently have good social communication, and I'm guessing that Hugh is one of those people. But for kids and youth with neurodisability, they are often very poor social communicators. And we know that when we're communicating with someone, we know when it feels good, we know when it clicks, and we feel a connection with that person. And that is in large part due to social communication. The other thing is that we have very conventional social norms for social communication. All of you are in here, you're nicely dressed, you're looking forward, you're paying attention, nobody's sitting in the back swearing or jumping up and dancing. Maybe somebody doesn't like the jacket I'm wearing, but you're not actually saying, Catherine, that's really awful. So, you know, society has very clear social norms, and kids and children and youth with neurodisability have difficulty following those conventional social norms. And as a result, they stick out. And they often get involved in the criminal justice system. So that's a word finding problem, and I'm chalking that up to fatigue. So social communication has 4 components. So first of all, we know that we use language for different purposes, many different purposes. Essentially, it's how we initiate and build our relationships, in addition to demanding, commanding, informing, all of those things. We also, as I just mentioned, we follow unspoken rules of conversation. So in this situation, I'm doing the speaking, but in a group conversation or a one-to-one, we take turns. And it's not very comfortable when one person doesn't respond or when one person takes all the turns. Okay. Eye contact is another one, and that's very culturally based. But in Canadian culture and in most developed cultures, eye contact is really important. And we know what it feels like to speak with someone who doesn't look at you. It feels bad. Right away, the whole energy changes and we feel uncomfortable. But many children and youth who are not neurotypical have difficulty with eye contact. Facial expressions and gestures. So it's really important for my facial expression to match what I'm speaking about. And what's interesting is that I've been told by some people with severe brain injuries is that because they have such difficulty with processing of auditory information, that they really may work really hard at actually looking at facial expression and reading those nonverbal cues. Others, as again, Hugh pointed out this morning, completely miss that. and may misinterpret or have a negative bias attribution. So I may be looking neutral, but someone may interpret that as aggression. The other thing is, of course, we need to adapt our communication style to the context. So we spoke about this context. So I know that if I'm speaking with a police officer, there's a certain manner that I need to present myself with in a courtroom, et cetera, as opposed to when I'm hanging out with my friends. So that's really difficult for children and youth who are not neurotypical to adapt their communication style according to the context. And again, that gets them into trouble. So what areas of communication function are affected by underlying cognitive impairments? Essentially every aspect of life, okay? Communication permeates every aspect of our ability to function in society. In addition to that, we look at what we call social cognition, and these go hand in hand with social communication. We conceptualize this both as a cognitive ability. So this is kind of like the ability to read the room, to understanding another person's thoughts and beliefs, as well as understanding that you have different experiences than I do, and that perhaps your thoughts and beliefs are different, and that's okay. People, particularly those with moderate severe brain injuries, are often very egocentric, and they have a lot of difficulty with this theory of mind and recognizing that someone may perceive something completely differently. So it's perspective taking also, being able to stand back and take another person's perspective. Empathy is likely, in my view, one of the highest cognitive functions, the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes and really understand what they're feeling, and to be able to respond to that. So the ability to have empathy, interestingly, we sometimes understand that autistic people or people with autism, whether you prefer identity first language or diagnosis first language, may have difficulty with empathy. The people that I know who self-identify as autistic are actually highly sensitive and report that they're highly empathetic, and that they actually have difficulty with eye contact because it's just so overwhelmingly powerful from an emotional perspective. But again, not everyone is able to feel empathy for another person. So social cognition, again, it's really the ability to recognize another's emotion and infer another's thoughts. Now, sometimes following brain injury, people have what is called alexithymia, which is a lack of emotion vocabulary, as well as difficulty with recognizing and understanding emotion in others. So at this point, I'm trying to be cognizant of time. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about comorbidities. And I think what's become abundantly clear is the need to look at this through an intersectional lens. So not only do children and youth with neurodisabilities in the criminal justice system internationally have other medical or mental health comorbidities, they have so many social comorbidities, social economic comorbidities. So this model, I apologize there, this is actually in press, which is why it's unfortunately we can't release it completely at this point. But we know that these are people who have had great experience of trauma, particularly in Canada. You know, we have so many Indigenous people who fill our prisons and jails. A female Indigenous woman has a greater chance of being incarcerated than graduating from high school in Canada, which is absolutely appalling. So experiences of racism, intergenerational trauma, colonization, colonialism, lack of culturally sensitive or culturally responsive care, low socioeconomic status, PTSD, migrants and refugees from war-torn countries. So all of these are barriers in accessing care for someone who actually has a brain injury or any type of neurodisability. And then we know that that can lead to or also co-occurring with experience of precarious housing. Hugh spoke about ACEs, adverse childhood events, gender-based violence, domestic violence, etc. So those then, having a TBI with that background creates additional risk factors, as we know, because that's why we're here, for recidivism, the cycle of criminalization. If people are in shelters or they're incarcerated, there's a greater risk of having additional injuries. Early school leaving, difficulty having a job. So again, that perpetual marginalization. So this is, I believe, the lens that we really need to look through when we're considering comorbidities. We also, of course, need to think about emotional behavioral needs. So trauma-informed, every single person that all of us work with here have experienced great trauma. And as Hugh and Hope so beautifully articulated, repeat experiences of trauma change our brains. And people with repeat trauma, we have two types of nervous systems. We have our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the one we want to be popular. That's how I teach that. That's kind of when we're not in fight or flight mode. We're just kind of calm and we're going about our daily life. But people who have experienced a lot of trauma primarily function on their sympathetic nervous system. So their heightened level of arousal, constantly in fight or flight, bodies are constantly releasing cortisol, difficulty with processing information, and so likely more exacerbated emotional responses. History of adverse childhood events, domestic violence, particularly in the United States, the statistics regarding sexual exploitation and sex trafficking of youth in the criminal justice system is absolutely appalling. And racism. There are many in the United States and Canada, persons of color, and Indigenous people who fill our prisons and jails. Now, on top of this, in addition to cognitive communication, Hope, your beautiful statistics showed that in addition to traumatic brain injury, that the prevalence of language and literacy impairments in children and youth who are incarcerated, as well as dyslexia, which is a reading issue, are equally as high. So what's interesting is, in my work, I'm trying to integrate the two because there's lots of literature, lots of evidence about brain injury in the criminal justice system. There's lots of evidence about language impairments, but really nobody is looking at the two combined. So when you superimpose language and literacy impairments on top of all the cognitive and cognitive communication impairments, no wonder these kids' lives and experience of the world is traumatic and fearful and chaotic. And when we don't have the language abilities that we need to communicate, what happens? And we add on that sleep deprivation, malnutrition, we get angry. If we can't communicate, we get angry and we lash out. And what happens? We're going against our conventional social norms. And so the police officer comes over and we get thrown in jail. I talked about the alexithymia, lack of vocabulary and knowledge of mental state terms. Not only that, but in many cultures, particularly boys and males, are not taught to speak about emotion. And many cultures in general, girls, women, regardless of what gender you identify with, you're not taught to understand or learn emotion vocabulary or your own needs. And when we don't even have the ability to recognize emotion in ourselves or recognize emotion in others, or even the bodily sensations of increased heart rate or breathing respiratory rate or flushing, again, all of those can lead to aggression or not picking up on emotion in another person. Depression, anxiety, psychiatric disorders. So this is sort of the overarching picture of who these children are. And we cannot isolate the neurodisability from the comorbid emotional, behavioral, contextual, societal experiences. So now let's just quickly take a look at what does this look like in the criminal justice system? And I really like this term, skill versus will. So in my private life, I'm a dancer and I still take class and I love it. And I really wanted to be a professional ballet dancer. But for whatever reason, I didn't have that level of skill to make it. I absolutely had the will, but no matter how hard I tried, I didn't have it. So we put such expectations on, I live in Canada. I have 3, young adult kids, are all in their 20s, and I teach in a university, and the pressures that our children and youth are put under these days is ridiculous. They're expected to have the skill and to produce and be perfect and get grades and be little adults, and they're not. Their brains are different. So we need to also, from a punitive rehabilitative lens in the criminal justice system, we cannot expect that people have the skill, and it's not a question of that they're bad people. I mean, that's why we're all here, right? So I really like that phrase. So as Hugh and Hope spoke about, these difficulties are invisible. These kids look exactly like somebody without a brain injury. So it's interpreted as they have a bad attitude. For those who have problems with slow processing or emotional dysregulation or word finding, or their discourse is all over the place, they're interpreted as they're using substances. It's amazing how many times people get, just assume that they're drunk or they're high. If they have delayed or slow processing, and most of them do, it looks like, well, what does it look like? Oh, you're not listening. Oh, yeah, thank you. You're being disrespectful, etc. So all of these are concurrent, and the cognitive communication impairment has profound implications for what transpires within the criminal legal system. Okay, so I was also asked to speak a little bit about cyclical criminalization and recidivism. So we know that cognitive communication disorders, that's the CCDs, put children and youth at a very high risk for negative consequences at every stage. So from first interaction with a police officer to lawyers, guards, fellow inmates, the language in the criminal legal system is highly abstract. It's fast-paced, the language is archaic. They have difficulty understanding, following probation orders. Half the time they don't show up, for the adults for bail hearings because they just don't remember. It's not because they're bad people. And what we also know is the wonderful work by Maxine Winstanley, that youth with developmental language disorders are more than twice as likely to reoffend than those without. So as I wrap up, I would like to also talk about the importance of the human right to communication. And I think this is absolutely crucial. Every developed country has legal policy for people with disabilities, and part of that is communication. So one of the things that speech language pathologists and speech language therapists do is we work as communication intermediaries in the court system. And that is really underutilized. So communication is a human right. And if we fail to make adequate efforts to ensure that all members of our community can understand and participate in matters that affect them, like being in the criminal justice system, which has lifelong implications, it prevents them from being heard and really prevents them from fair access to justice. So a lot of times we know that people are coerced and trapped. People with neurodisabilities say that they've committed things that they haven't. So we absolutely need to have an understanding of the communication abilities of the individual. And we need to work with a neurodevelopmental and a rehabilitative lens. So I am very happy to share my slides. I know that's a lot of information. I'm going to quickly, and I'm not going to spend time talking about them, but just show you 3 slides that I added in. This is called The Wheel of Privilege and Power, and it's actually a Canadian document. It didn't transform well onto the slide. It's hard to read. But people on here, on the inner circle, so we have cisgender men, male, high SES, neurotypical, white, owns property, post-secondary education. These are the people on the very inner part of the circle that have the power. We spoke about, power. So people on the outer part of the wheel, those are the folks who are the most vulnerable in our society. And you can take a look at this more closely so you can actually read. So I think that's an important lens. The second is I am so proud to be from a country where we have a rich, beautiful tradition of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous wisdom. And I love this slide because I think it offers a really unique lens for us to view the world and the work that we do. So this morning we heard about the biopsychosocial approach, the biopsychosocial model. When we look at health, we look at interdependence, and we look at, not only do we look at physical health, we look at emotional, mental health, but we look at spiritual health. We look at sense of community. So I just like to offer that as a way that maybe we should be looking at things. And then lastly, again, I will share the slides. This is the Youth Justice Outcomes Framework from Ontario, Canada. And I think it's a really nice visual, fairly simple model that can guide rehabilitation. So as I say, I'm happy to share these with others, and I'm going to stop. So thank you so very much. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Dr. James Tonks. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You go ahead.
Thank you.
So switching, the Ontario court in Canada were the only courts ever to set out the measure for capacity for divorce. So if you want to divorce, the court there said you had to, understand that the obligations were broken and various things like that, which I thought was very
That's
cool.
interesting. I didn't know.
Yeah, it's the only one. So, unless a lawyer has a different view.
So for everyone who is attending online, please, I will send you right now like the new link, and then I'll see you there. Thank you.